I never thought at 79 I'd be planning a war against my own children. There I was, dusting Sebastian's portrait in our cliffside drawing room, when I found the forged power of attorney document tucked behind his gilded frame. My husband's knowing eyes seemed to mock me from the canvas as I read how my eldest son had legally stolen everything we'd built together. 40 years of theater ownership, 3 coastal properties, and a fortune worth millions, all transferred to Sebastian Jr. while I was supposedly mentally incompetent. They thought crazy old Grandma Estelle would never notice. But what happens when the woman they dismissed as senile turns out to have a Harvard-educated lawyer for a best friend and a memory sharper than their greed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog rolled in from the Pacific as I sat in my breakfast nook, staring at that damning document. 24 hours had passed since my discovery, and I still couldn't quite believe what I was reading. My hands trembled, not from age, mind you, but from rage so pure it felt like stage lights burning through my veins. I'd always been dismissed as the theatrical one in the family. There goes crazy Grandma Estelle, talking to portraits and quoting Shakespeare. They'd whisper during holiday dinners. If only they knew that this crazy grandma had once commanded standing ovations from Portland to San Francisco, that I'd built half their inheritance by convincing investors to back Sebastian's theater acquisitions with my charm and business acumen. The house felt different now, charged with possibility. Our clifftop estate in Cannon Beach had been my refuge for the past 5 years since Sebastian's passing. But suddenly, it felt like a stage set waiting for the performance of my lifetime. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent decades playing other people's stories, and now I was about to reclaim my own. I walked through rooms that held 50 years of memories, each piece of furniture a witness to the family I'd raised and the fortune we'd accumulated. The grandfather clock in the foyer still chimed every hour, its brass pendulum marking time like a metronome for the drama about to unfold. Sebastian had bought it at an estate sale in 1987, the same year we acquired our 3rd theater in Eugene. "Time is the only currency that matters," he'd said, winding it carefully. How prophetic those words seemed now. In the study where Sebastian had conducted business for decades, I found more evidence of my children's betrayal. Bank statements I'd never seen, property transfers I'd never signed, medical evaluations declaring my diminished capacity based on appointments I'd never attended. Dr. Garrison's signature appeared on several documents, though I hadn't seen him since my routine physical 2 years ago. The web of deception was intricate, professional, and absolutely devastating. My eldest, Sebastian Jr., had orchestrated this theft with surgical precision. At 52, he possessed his father's business mind, but none of his heart. He'd taken over Marchand Entertainment Group immediately after the funeral, promising to handle everything. While I grieved, I'd been grateful then, drowning in widow's sorrow and overwhelmed by financial complexities I'd never had to navigate alone. His gentleness during those dark months now revealed itself as calculated manipulation. The evidence painted a clear picture. Sebastian Jr. had used my grief-stricken state to obtain medical opinions supporting his claim that I was mentally incompetent. Dr. Mireille, my own daughter, had provided psychological evaluations supporting these claims. My neurologist daughter, who'd spent her career studying the human mind, had clinically dissected her own mother's mental state for financial gain. Theo, my youngest at 47, appeared to be a reluctant participant. His signature appeared on fewer documents, and I found several emails where he'd questioned his siblings' aggressive timeline. Maybe we should wait. He'd written to Sebastian Jr. Mom seems sharper lately. But even Theo's mild protests had been overruled by his more dominant siblings. I poured myself a cup of Earl Grey and walked onto the wraparound porch that faced the ocean. The November wind was fierce, whipping my silver hair around my face like a battle flag. Below, waves crashed against the rocky shoreline with relentless persistence. That's what I needed to be. Relentless, persistent, unstoppable. The portrait. Discovery had been accidental, triggered by my weekly cleaning ritual. I'd been dusting Sebastian's massive oil painting, a formal piece commissioned during our prosperous years in the 1990s, when I noticed the frame sitting oddly against the wall. Behind it, tucked into a manila envelope, were copies of documents I was never meant to see. Sebastian Jr. must have hidden them there temporarily, perhaps during one of his visits, never imagining I'd find them. My husband's painted eyes seemed to follow me as I examined each paper. In the portrait, he wore his favorite navy suit and the gold watch I'd given him for our 25th anniversary. The artist had captured his confident smile, the same expression he'd worn when closing deals or charming investors. If Sebastian were alive, heads would roll. He'd built his empire on handshake deals and unwavering loyalty, values his son had apparently inherited selectively. The telephone rang, its shrill tone cutting through my thoughts. "Estelle!" The voice belonged to Mrs. Chen from next door. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, dear. I noticed you haven't collected your mail in a few days." "Just been busy, Margaret. Nothing to worry about." I kept my voice steady, though inside I was calculating. How long had I been so consumed with grief and routine that I'd missed the signs of this elaborate theft? "Well, if you need anything." Margaret's voice trailed off. She'd been a good neighbor since moving in 3 years ago, but I'd kept our relationship politely distant. Now I wondered who else had noticed my declining state, who else might have been feeding information to my children about my daily habits and mental acuity. After hanging up, I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, each step deliberate and measured. In my walk-in closet, behind winter coats and forgotten evening gowns, sat my old stage makeup kit. The leather case was cracked with age, its brass latches tarnished green, but inside lay treasures that could transform any face, tell any story. Opened the kit slowly, breathing in the familiar scent of grease paint and powder. These tools had once helped me become Lady Macbeth, Blanche Dubois, and dozens of other complex women. Each character had required not just memorizing lines, but understanding motivations, embracing contradictions, and commanding attention. Now I needed to channel all those skills into playing the most important role of my life, myself. The mirror on my vanity reflected a woman my children saw as diminished, confused, easily manipulated. Silver hair that I'd stopped coloring years ago, laugh lines that had deepened into permanent creases, and eyes they assumed held more confusion than clarity. But I saw something different in that reflection. I saw an actress preparing for her comeback performance. My phone buzzed with a text from Uni, my 23-year-old granddaughter. "Hey, Grandma E, can I come visit this weekend? I have some work stuff I want to run by you." Junie was Sebastian Jr.'s daughter, but she'd always been different from the rest of the family. She asked questions, noticed details, and never seemed satisfied with surface explanations. Perhaps it was time to see if she'd inherited more than just the marchand business sense. I texted back, "Of course, darling. I'll make your favorite lemon bars." But my mind was already working on a different recipe, one for justice, served at exactly the right temperature to burn. The afternoon light was fading as I sat down at Sebastian's old desk and pulled out a legal pad. If I was going to wage war against my own family, I needed to document everything, meticulously. Each forged signature, each manipulated date, each lie told to accomplish their theft. They'd underestimated me once. I wouldn't give them the chance to do it again. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "Evidence of fraud and elder abuse, November 15th, 2018. Below that, I began listing every document I'd found, every discrepancy I'd noticed, every conversation that now took on sinister new meaning. The list grew longer as memories surfaced. Sebastian Jr.'s insistence on handling all legal matters, Mireille's subtle suggestions about my confusion, Tio's nervous fidgeting during recent visits. As darkness settled over the coastline, I made another decision. Tomorrow I would call Alton Reyes, my old stage partner from the Shakespeare Company. If anyone could help me navigate this legal battlefield, it would be Alton. He'd left theater in the 1980s for law school, eventually building a successful practice in Portland. More importantly, he was the only person alive who'd seen me at my strongest, who knew the real Estelle beneath the grieving widow facade. The portrait watched as I worked, Sebastian's painted smile now seeming more encouraging than mocking. We'd built something beautiful together. Not just financial success, but a legacy of supporting regional theater, nurturing young artists, and contributing to our community's cultural life. I wouldn't let our children's greed tarnish what we'd accomplished. By midnight, I had filled 12 pages with evidence and observations. My handwriting remained steady, my memory sharp, my anger transformed into focused determination. Tomorrow would begin the most challenging performance of my career, convincing the world that this crazy grandma was anything but. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. I was reviewing my evidence over coffee when the doorbell chimed. Through the peephole, I saw Sebastian Jr. and Mireille standing on my porch, both wearing the concerned expressions they'd perfected over the past year. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my face into the confused, slightly addled look they expected. "Mother," Sebastian Jr. said as I opened the door, "we need to talk." He brushed past me without invitation, his expensive wool coat still damp from the morning. Missed. Mireille followed, her medical bag in hand. Never a good sign. "How lovely to see you both," I said, though my voice wavered authentically. The documents were safely hidden in my bedroom, but paranoia clawed at my throat. "Would you like some tea? Actually, Mom," Mireille's voice carried that clinical tone she'd developed during medical school, "we're concerned about you. Mrs. Chen called Sebastian yesterday. She said you've been talking to yourself, standing on the porch at odd hours, acting confused. Margaret Chen, my helpful neighbor." I filed that betrayal away for future consideration, while maintaining my bewildered expression. "I don't understand. I was just getting some fresh air." Sebastian Jr. settled into his father's favorite armchair without being invited, his territorial claim unmistakable. "Mother, we think it might be time to consider some changes. This house is too big for you, too isolated. We've been looking at some excellent assisted living facilities." "Assisted living?" The words escaped before I could stop them, sharp with indignation. I caught myself quickly, adding with feigned confusion, "But this is my home. Sebastian and I, all our memories." Mireille opened her medical bag and pulled out a blood pressure cuff. "Let's just check your vitals while we're here. You look a bit flushed." Her hands were gentle but impersonal as she wrapped the cuff around my arm. "Your blood pressure is elevated. That's concerning for someone your age. I'm fine, I protested, weakly, though my mind raced. They weren't here for a casual visit. This was reconnaissance, gathering more ammunition for their case that I was incompetent. Mom, you've been talking to Dad's portrait again, Sebastian Jr. said, his voice patient, but patronizing. The housekeeper mentioned it during her last visit, and your mail has been piling up. These are signs we can't ignore. Mrs. Rodriguez had been cleaning my house monthly for 3 years. Another spy in my ranks. I wondered what else she'd reported. My late-night pacing as I processed my discovery. My conversations with Sebastian's painted image as I worked through my emotions. My newfound energy as I planned my counterattack. I miss him, I said truthfully, letting tears gather in my eyes. Sometimes I forget he's gone. Is that so wrong? The tears weren't entirely theatrical. I did miss Sebastian terribly, especially now when I needed his strength and counsel. Mireille and Sebastian Jr. exchanged a look I wasn't supposed to catch. In that silent communication, I saw the callous calculation of my own children plotting my downfall. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making my legs unsteady. Perhaps you should sit down, Mireille suggested, guiding me to the sofa with professional efficiency. Have you been taking your medications regularly? Your memory supplements? Your blood pressure pills? Memory supplements I'd never been prescribed. Blood pressure medication I'd never needed. Another lie for their growing file of evidence. I think so, I whispered, playing into their narrative while memorizing every word for future use. Sebastian Jr. stood and walked to the mantelpiece, studying family photographs with theatrical casualness. You know, Mother, we've been thinking about Dad's business legacy. The company needs strong leadership, decisive management. These past few years have been challenging. The business is fine, I interrupted, then caught myself. According to their narrative, I wouldn't know anything about business affairs. I mean, isn't it fine? Sebastian always said. Dad's been gone for 5 years, Sebastian Jr. said gently, as if explaining to a child. You haven't been involved in company decisions during that time. We've been protecting you from the stress, handling everything so you could grieve properly, protecting me. The euphemism made my stomach turn. I watched my son inventory our possessions with the eyes of an appraiser, noting the antique vases, the original paintings, the Persian rugs that would soon be his to liquidate or keep. Where's Theo? I asked, genuinely curious about my youngest son's absence from this intervention. He's handling some business in Portland, Mireille answered, quickly. He agrees with our concerns, Mom. We're all worried about you living alone out here. Lies built upon lies. I wondered if Theo even knew about this visit, if he was complicit in this particular manipulation, or if his siblings were simply using his name for weight. Sebastian Jr. pulled out his phone and began scrolling through images. Look, Mother, this place is beautiful. Ocean View Manor in Lincoln City. Private rooms, around-the-clock care, activities designed for people with memory issues. You'd have friends your own age. Proper supervision. Supervision! The word escaped with more force than I intended. I was 79, not 99, and my mind was sharp as ever. I don't need supervision. I need my home, my memories, Your independence is important to us too, Mireille interrupted smoothly. But independence includes making responsible choices about your safety and well-being. Dad would want us to take care of you. Invoking Sebastian was a tactical error that revealed their desperation. My husband would be horrified by their actions. And they knew it. He'd built his business on relationships and trust, values that apparently died with him. "I need to use the bathroom," I announced, standing with deliberate frailty. They exchanged another look, concern about what I might do unsupervised, what evidence I might tamper with or hide. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes bright with anger and adrenaline. I looked very much alive, very much competent, the opposite of their narrative. Before returning, I deliberately mussed my hair and practiced a confused, slightly vacant expression. When I emerged, Sebastian Jr. was standing near the window, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, she seems more confused than last month," he was saying quietly. "Mireille thinks we should accelerate the timeline. Accelerate the timeline." They were coordinating my destruction with military precision, and I was apparently behind schedule in my deterioration. I shuffled back to the sofa with exaggerated slowness, buying time to think. Mireille was examining family photos on the side table, pictures of grandchildren, old theater promotional shots, vacation snapshots from happier times. "Mom, do you remember when this was taken?" She held up a photo from our 2010 trip to Paris, the last vacation Sebastian and I had taken together. The question was a trap. If I remembered too much detail, I was suspiciously sharp. If I remembered too little, I was proving their point about my declining memory. "Paris," I said vaguely. "We went to Paris. Sebastian loved the museums." "Do you remember what year? A few years ago?" I let uncertainty color my voice, while my mind catalogued every detail of that trip. The hotel near the Champs-Élysées, the afternoon we'd spent at Père Lachaise Cemetery, the promise we'd made to return for our 60th anniversary. Sebastian Jr. ended his phone call and returned to the conversation. "That was Dr. Garrison's office. We've scheduled a comprehensive evaluation for next week. Nothing invasive, just some tests to help us understand what kind of care you need. Dr. Garrison, whose signature appeared on documents declaring my incompetence. The same doctor who'd apparently been treating me without my knowledge, prescribing medications I'd never received, documenting symptoms I'd never exhibited. The web of conspiracy was tighter than I'd imagined. "I don't want tests," I said plaintively. "I just want to be left alone in my house with my memories." "Mom," Mireille's voice carried forced patience. "We can't leave you alone if you're not safe. What if you fell? What if you forgot to turn off the stove? What if you wandered outside and got lost? What if? They were building a fortress of hypothetical dangers to justify their actual theft. I nodded with apparent resignation while internally planning their destruction. "We'll handle all the arrangements," Sebastian Jr. assured me. "The transition will be gradual, comfortable. We'll make sure your favorite things come with you to Ocean View Manor. My favorite things." The condescension was breathtaking. They were stealing my entire life and presenting it as a gift, a generous gesture by caring children who only wanted what was best for their addled mother. "Can I think about it?" I asked weakly. "It's so much to take in." "Of course," Mireille said, though her tone suggested thinking was exactly what she hoped I wouldn't do. "But don't take too long, Mom. Winter's coming, and this house gets so cold and isolated." They stayed another hour, inventorying my mental state with clinical detachment. Sebastian Jr. tested my memory with pointed questions about recent events, while Mireille observed my responses with professional scrutiny. I failed their tests, with carefully calculated mistakes, providing just enough confusion to support their narrative while maintaining enough clarity to avoid immediate intervention. After they left, I sat in the sudden silence of my violated home, The familiar rooms felt different now, contaminated by their presence and their plans. They'd stood in my living room and discussed my future as if I were already gone, as if my opinion mattered no more than a child's preference for bedtime stories. But I wasn't gone. I wasn't confused or incompetent or ready to surrender. I was a 79-year-old woman with 5 decades of acting experience, a sharp mind, and access to evidence of their crimes. More importantly, I was finally, completely angry. I walked to Sebastian's portrait and looked into his painted eyes. "Well, my dear," I said aloud, no longer caring who might overhear. "It seems our children have forgotten who raised them. Time to remind them. Tomorrow I would call Alton. Tonight I would prepare for the performance of my lifetime." Alton Reyes answered his phone on the second ring, his voice as theatrical and warm as I remembered. "Estelle Marchand, don't tell me you're finally ready to run away and join the circus again." Despite everything, I laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. Something like that. "Alton, I need a lawyer. More than that, I need a friend who remembers who I used to be before I became crazy Grandma Estelle." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. When Alton spoke again, his voice carried the gravity of someone who'd spent 30 years practicing law. "Tell me everything." I did. For 2 hours, I recounted my discovery, my children's visit, the systematic theft of my inheritance and identity. Alton listened without interruption, occasionally humming the low, thoughtful sound he'd made during our rehearsals when working through a particularly complex character motivation. "Jesus Christ, Estelle," he said finally. "This isn't just family drama. This is organized elder abuse with a healthy dose of fraud. When can you get to Portland?" "They're expecting me to deteriorate," I said. "Too much activity might raise suspicions." "Then I'm coming to you. Can you handle visitors without arousing suspicion?" I thought about my neighbors, my children's surveillance, network, the careful performance I'd need to maintain. Come as an old friend paying condolences. Bring flowers. Act concerned about my welfare. Everyone expects that these days. "I'll be there tomorrow afternoon. And Estelle, don't sign anything, don't agree to any medical procedures, and don't let them move you anywhere. We're going to burn their house down, legally speaking." After hanging up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope mixed with anticipation. It was the same feeling I'd had before opening nights, when months of preparation culminated in that electric moment before the curtain rose. I spent the evening organizing my evidence more systematically. Sebastian's home office became my war room, his mahogany desk transformed into mission control for my counterattack. I spread documents across the leather-inlaid surface, creating timelines of their deception and mapping connections between forged signatures and suspicious transactions. The business ledger I found in Sebastian's safe proved particularly damning. My husband had been meticulous about record-keeping, documenting every theater acquisition, every property purchase, every major decision from our early years through 2013, the year of his death. But someone had continued making entries after his death, entries in handwriting that looked like Sebastian's, but felt wrong to my trained eye. I'd spent decades watching actors forge emotions and characters. Recognizing forged handwriting wasn't much different. The post-death entries were too careful, too studied, lacking the natural rhythm of Sebastian's actual writing. Someone had practiced his signature extensively, but they couldn't replicate the unconscious flourishes and pressure, patterns of genuine writing. More disturbing were the decisions documented in these false entries. Properties sold at below-market prices to buyers who turned out to be shell companies. theater equipment donated to organizations that existed only on paper, investment losses that seemed designed to reduce the estate's apparent value. My children hadn't just stolen from me. They'd been systematically looting their father's legacy for years. Around midnight, exhaustion finally overcame adrenaline. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, where Sebastian's reading glasses still sat on his nightstand, next to a bookmark marking his place in a biography of Eugene O'Neill. For 5 years, I'd left everything exactly as it was the morning he died, creating a shrine to our shared life. Now these preserved memories felt like evidence of my own complicity in their scheme. I'd been so consumed with grief, so overwhelmed by loss, that I'd gratefully handed control to my children without question. Sebastian had always handled our finances, made our major decisions, navigated the complexities of business ownership. After his death, I'd felt like an understudy thrust onto stage without knowing the lines or blocking. When Sebastian Jr. offered to handle everything, I'd seen it as kindness rather than opportunity. Sleep brought dreams of old performances, nights when I'd commanded packed theaters, when my voice could silence a restless audience or move them to thunderous applause. In my dreams, I was 30 again, powerful and confident, feared and respected by directors who knew I could make or break their productions. I woke feeling like that woman still lived inside me, buried under years of widowhood and family dismissal, but not destroyed. The next morning brought rain and Junie's unexpected early arrival. I was still in my robe when she knocked, looking like a drowned kitten in her oversized raincoat. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Grandma E, I hope it's okay I came early. I couldn't sleep, and I had this weird feeling I needed to see you. Junie shook rain from her dark hair, the same deep brown Sebastian had passed to all his descendants. At 23, she possessed the restless energy I remembered from my own youth, when the world seemed full of stories waiting to be told. I hugged her tightly, breathing in her familiar scent of coffee and expensive shampoo. Junie was Sebastian Jr.'s daughter, but she'd inherited her grandfather's curiosity and my own theatrical instincts. She asked uncomfortable questions, noticed details others missed, and never seemed satisfied with surface explanations. You look different, she said, studying my face with the intensity she brought to her journalism work. More awake somehow. Have you been sleeping better? Such a perceptive child. I'd forgotten how dangerous honesty could be around Junie. She had an investigative reporter's nose for inconsistency. Just having some good days, I said carefully. Come, let me make you breakfast. We sat in my breakfast nook overlooking the ocean, Junie devouring scrambled eggs while updating me on her freelance writing career. She was building a portfolio of investigative pieces, she explained, hoping to land a position with a major newspaper or magazine. I'm working on this series about elder abuse, she said between bites. It's horrifying how many families steal from their elderly relatives. The victims often don't even realize what's happening, because the abuse is so gradual, so subtle. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Was this coincidence? Or had Junie somehow sensed what was happening in her own family? That sounds fascinating, I managed. The perpetrators always justify it as protecting their relatives' best interests. Junie continued, her eyes bright with professional passion. They convince themselves they're being responsible, preventing their elderly parent from making poor decisions. But it's really about control and money. Every word felt like a scalpel cutting through my children's rationalizations. Have you interviewed any victims? That's the hardest part. Most won't talk. They're ashamed or afraid of destroying family relationships or genuinely convinced they need the protection their children are providing. Junie paused, studying my face again. Grandma E, is everything okay? You seem, different. Lately. Before I could answer, another car pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I saw Alton emerging from a silver BMW, his silver hair gleaming despite the rain. He'd aged well, still tall and commanding, still moving with the confident grace that had made him magnetic on stage. Who's that? Junie asked, following my gaze. An old friend, I said, my heart rate accelerating. Someone I haven't seen in years. Alton knocked with theatrical flair, 3 sharp raps followed by 2 softer ones, our old signal from backstage. Days. When I opened the door, he swept me into an embrace that felt like coming home. Estelle, my dear, you look magnificent, he said loudly enough for Junie to hear. Then, quieter. Ready to raise some hell? I introduced him to Junie as Alton Reyes, my old acting partner from the Shakespeare Company. Junie perked up immediately. She'd always loved hearing stories about my theater days, unlike her father and aunts who found my artistic past embarrassing. The Alton Reyes? Junie's eyes widened. I've read about you. You were in that famous production of King Lear at the Portland. Center stage in 1982. Guilty as charged. Alton laughed, settling into the breakfast nook with natural ease. Your grandmother and I brought down the house in that production. She played Goneril to my Lear. Absolutely devastating performance. I had no idea you were a lawyer too, Junie said. Your bio just mentions the theater work. Law school seemed like a practical backup plan, Alton explained. Turns out I had a talent for it. Been practicing in Portland for 30 years now, though I still take on the occasional case that reminds me of my theatrical days. The conversation flowed naturally as I served coffee, and Alton charmed Junie with stories from our acting days. But I caught the meaningful glances he threw my way, the subtle questions about my recent well-being, the careful assessment of my mental acuity. He was building a professional opinion, documenting my competence for future legal use. Junie, I said eventually, would you mind walking down to the village? I need some groceries, and the fresh air would do you good after your drive. She hesitated, sensing undercurrents she couldn't quite identify. Are you sure? I don't mind staying. Go, Alton said gently. Your grandmother and I have some old memories to catch up on. We'll probably bore you with theater gossip anyway. After Junie left, Alton's demeanor shifted instantly from social to professional. He pulled out a digital recorder and legal pad, transforming my breakfast nook into a conference room. First things first, he said. I need to see everything you found. For the next 2 hours, we spread documents across my dining room table, while Alton photographed each piece with meticulous care. His Harvard law degree hung in his downtown office, but his analytical mind was on full display in my coastal living room. He identified forgeries I'd missed, spotted inconsistencies in dates and signatures, and began building a timeline of systematic fraud that stretched back years. This is prosecutable, he said finally. Not just civil fraud, criminal fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy. Your children could face prison time if we play this right. The word prison hit me like cold water. These were my children, people I'd carried in my body, raised with love, supported through failures, and celebrated through successes. I don't want revenge, I said slowly. I want justice. I want my life back. Sometimes they're the same thing, Alton replied. But we'll start with civil action. Sue for return of all assets, monetary damages for emotional distress, and full restoration of your legal rights. The criminal charges can come later if they don't cooperate. How long will it take? Depends on their response. If they're smart, they'll settle quickly and quietly. If they're arrogant enough to think they can outsmart us, Alton's smile was predatory. Well then, we give them the full theatrical production, media coverage, public hearings, the works. I thought about Sebastian Jr.'s confidence, Mireille's clinical detachment, their absolute certainty that I was too weak and confused to fight back. They're arrogant, I said. They've gotten away with this for years. They think I'm helpless. Perfect, Alton said. Arrogance makes people careless. We'll file papers next week, serve them simultaneously so they can't coordinate their stories. Hit them hard and fast before they know what's happening. When Junie returned with groceries, she found us discussing old theater productions with animated enthusiasm. Alton was describing a disastrous Romeo and Juliet, where the balcony had collapsed during the famous scene, while I laughed until tears ran down my cheeks. We looked like exactly what we were supposed to be. Old friends reminiscing about happier times. But underneath the performance, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt dangerous. The legal papers were served on a gray Tuesday morning, while I sat in my kitchen pretending to read yesterday's newspaper for the third time. Alton had coordinated the timing precisely. Sebastian Jr. at his downtown office, Mireille at the hospital, Theo at his apartment in southeast Portland. All three would receive their summons simultaneously at 10:15 a.m., preventing them from warning each other or coordinating their initial responses. I watched the clock with the same anticipation I'd once felt waiting for my entrance cue. At 10:16, my phone began ringing. Mother? Sebastian Jr.'s voice was tight with controlled fury. We need to talk. Now. Is everything all right, dear? I kept my voice confused, slightly breathy. You sound upset. I'm coming over, don't talk, to anyone, until I get there. He hung up without saying goodbye, a breach of the polite facade he'd maintained throughout their systematic theft. Good. Anger made people careless, and I needed Sebastian Jr. to be very, very careless. I had perhaps 45 minutes before he arrived from downtown Portland. I spent that time in my bedroom, applying makeup with the precision I'd learned over decades of stage work. The goal wasn't beauty. It was character. I needed to look like a woman slowly waking up from grief's fog, becoming aware of complexities she'd previously ignored, vulnerable but not helpless, confused but not incompetent. The foundation covered the healthy flush that had returned to my cheeks since beginning this fight. A touch of gray eyeshadow suggested fatigue, while careful concealer emphasized the lines around my eyes. I left my silver hair slightly unkempt and chose clothes that suggested someone making an effort to dress properly, but not quite succeeding. A blue sweater with one button fastened incorrectly, slacks that didn't quite match. Sebastian Jr. arrived, with Mireille in tow, both of them vibrating with barely controlled rage. They swept through my front door like an invading army, their expensive coats and professional attire starkly contrasting with my deliberate frumpiness. Mother. Sebastian Jr. began without preamble. This lawsuit is insane. Completely insane. You're accusing us of stealing from you? I blinked at him with practiced confusion. Lawsuit? I don't understand. Mireille thrust the legal papers under my nose. You're suing us, Mom. You're claiming we forged documents and stole Dad's business. This is... She struggled for words. This is delusional. I didn't sue anyone, I said plaintively. I wouldn't know how to sue anyone. I don't even have a lawyer. Alton Reyes, Sebastian Jr. spat. Your old theater friend, who's apparently convinced you were criminals. Mom, this man is taking advantage of your confusion. He's probably after your money himself. Alton? I let my voice brighten with apparent recognition. He visited yesterday. Such a nice man. We talked about the old days. I paused as if trying to remember. He did ask about business things, but I told him I don't understand business. Sebastian always handled all that. Brother and sister exchanged glances heavy with frustration. They'd expected me to be confused about the lawsuit's existence, but they'd also expected me to be eager to dismiss it once they explained my apparent lack of understanding was complicating their narrative. Mother, Mireille said, adopting her most professional bedside manner. Mr. Reyes has filed very serious accusations. He's claiming we manipulated you into signing documents you didn't understand. That's simply not true. I sign lots of papers, I said vaguely. You children bring me papers all the time. I trust you to tell me what they are. Another exchanged look. I was giving them exactly what they'd built their case on. An elderly woman who signed documents without reading them, who trusted her. Children's explanations, who couldn't be held responsible for complex legal decisions. But now that same incompetence was making their defense more difficult. Sebastian Jr. pulled out his phone and started pacing. I'm calling Dr. Garrison. We need immediate documentation of Mom's mental state. This lawsuit proves she's being manipulated by outside influences. Will someone please explain what's happening? I asked, allowing distress to creep into my voice. I just want to be left alone. I don't want any trouble. There's no trouble, Mom, Mireille soothed, though her jaw was tight with tension. Just some legal confusion we need to sort out. You don't need to worry about any of this. She was right that I didn't need to worry, but not for the reasons she thought. Alton had prepared me for this exact response. My children would try to have me declared incompetent to stand trial, which would require current medical documentation of my alleged mental deficits. But Dr. Garrison's previous evaluations were all based on second-hand reports and forged documents. A genuine evaluation would be much harder to manipulate. I want Theo here, I said suddenly. If there's family business to discuss, Theo should be here too. Sebastian Jr. stopped pacing. Theo's busy. We can fill him in later. He's your brother, I insisted with a flash of my old authority. If you're going to upset me with talk of lawsuits and doctors, I want all my children present. It was a reasonable request that they couldn't deny without seeming suspicious. Mireille made the call while Sebastian Jr. continued pacing, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in urgent whispers to what sounded like his own attorney. Theo arrived an hour later, looking confused and slightly sick. At 47, he remained the most sensitive of my children, the one who'd inherited Sebastian's artistic appreciation without the killer instinct needed for business success. His camera bag suggested he'd been pulled away from a photography session, and his rumpled clothes indicated he'd driven straight over without changing. Mom, he said, hugging me gently. Are you okay? Sebastian said there was some kind of legal emergency. I don't know what's happening, I told him honestly. Everyone's very upset about papers and lawyers, but no one will explain it in a way I can understand. Theo looked at his siblings with confusion. What papers? What lawyers? Sebastian Jr. thrust the lawsuit at him. Read this. Mom's supposedly suing us for fraud and elder abuse. Claims we stole Dad's business and forged documents. I watched Theo's face as he read, noting the surprise that seemed genuine rather than performed. His eyebrows drew together as he reached the evidence sections, and his color gradually paled. "These signatures," he said slowly, looking up at Sebastian Jr. "Some of these don't look like Dad's handwriting." "Of course they do," Mireille snapped. "Dad's handwriting changed as he got older. You know that." "But this one's dated 6 months after he died," Theo said, pointing to a property transfer document. "That can't be right." Silence fell over the room like a curtain. Sebastian Jr. and Mireille stared at their younger brother with the kind of fury reserved for family members who ask inconvenient questions. Theo stared back with growing comprehension and horror. "Oh my God," he whispered. "You actually did it. You actually forged Dad's signature." "Theo," Sebastian Jr. began, "did you know about this?" Theo turned to me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mom, did you know what they were doing?" "I don't understand what anyone's talking about," I said, which was partly true. I understood. Their crimes. But I didn't understand how 2 of my children could have fallen so far from the values Sebastian and I had tried to instill. "They've been stealing from you," Theo said, his voice breaking. "For years they've been stealing Dad's business, selling off properties, probably skimming money." "That's enough," Mireille said sharply. "Theo, you don't understand the complexities involved. We've been protecting Mom from financial stress, making difficult decisions she couldn't handle. By forging Dad's signature, by lying about her mental capacity." Theo's voice rose with each word. "Jesus Christ, Mireille, you're a doctor. You took an oath to do no harm." "I took an oath to help people," she shot back. "Sometimes that means making hard choices about what's best for them." What's best for them, or what's best for you? The family was fracturing before my eyes, decades of hidden resentments and competing loyalties finally erupting into open conflict. Sebastian Jr. looked like he wanted to physically restrain his younger brother, while Mireille had retreated into her clinical shell, her face carefully blank. "I want everyone to leave," I said quietly. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, surprised by the clarity in my voice. "I'm tired, and I'm confused, and I don't want to listen to my children fighting in my living room." "Mom," all 3 began simultaneously. "Go." I stood up slowly, using the arm of my chair for support. "I need to rest. I need to think. I don't want to see any of you until you can be civil to each other." It was a masterful exit line, delivered with enough frail dignity to make them feel guilty while establishing my right to control my own home. They filed out reluctantly, Sebastian, Jr. and Mireille whispering urgently, while Theo lingered at the door. "Mom," he said softly, "if you need anything at all, call me, okay?" I nodded, keeping my expression confused but grateful. After they left, I stood at my window watching their cars disappear down the coastal highway. Theo drove away, alone, while Sebastian Jr. and Mireille left together, a clear indication of the battle lines being drawn. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Alton's voice was warm with satisfaction. "How did it go?" "Better than expected," I said. "Theo figured out the forged signatures on his own. I think we might have an ally." "Even better. Family testimony is always powerful in court. What about the other 2? Panicked, angry, already planning their counterattack through medical channels. Let them try. We've got documentation of your competence, and any new evaluation will have to account for your ability to initiate legal action. Hard to argue someone's incompetent when they're successfully prosecuting a complex fraud case." That evening, Juna, called with barely contained excitement. "Grandma E, I heard Dad and Aunt Mireille on the phone earlier. Something about a lawsuit. They sounded really upset." I'd been expecting this call. Junie was too smart and too connected to miss the family drama unfolding around her. "There seems to be some confusion about business matters," I said carefully. "Legal things I don't really understand." "But you have a lawyer now. That's good, right? Dad's been handling everything since Grandpa died, and maybe it's time for someone else to take a look at things, out of the mouths of babes." Junie had identified the core issue without knowing the full scope of her father's betrayal. Her instincts were solid. She sensed something wrong, even if she didn't yet understand what. "Junie," I said impulsively, "would you like to come stay with me for a few days? I could use the company, and you mentioned wanting to work on your writing." "Really? That would be amazing. I've been wanting to interview you about your theater days anyway, for a piece I'm working on about women in regional theater." Perfect. Alton had suggested having a witness present during this volatile period, someone who could document my mental acuity and provide an independent perspective on family interactions. Junie's journalism background made her an ideal observer, and her presence would force my other children to moderate their behavior. After hanging up, I walked onto my porch and stood looking out at the Pacific. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the same colors I'd once worn as Lady Macbeth in our 1975 production. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new performances, new opportunities to outmaneuver my adversaries. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not the grieving widow, not the confused grandmother, but Estelle Marchand, actress, fighter, and architect of her own destiny. Junie arrived the next morning with enough luggage for a week-long stay and a digital recorder that she set up on my kitchen table with professional efficiency. "I've been researching the regional theater scene of the 1970s and 80s, she said, pulling out a notebook filled with questions. "Your career was more significant than you've ever let on, wasn't it?" I poured coffee and settled across from her, surprised by how much I'd missed discussing my past with someone who genuinely wanted to listen. "Your father and aunts never showed much interest in my theater days. They found it embarrassing, I think." "That's insane. You were a founding member of the Marchand Theater Company. You performed with some of the most respected actors on the West Coast. Why would they be embarrassed?" The question caught me off guard. "How do you know about the founding membership?" Junie flipped through her notes. "I've been researching online archives, old newspaper reviews, program credits. There are photos of you and Grandpa at the company's incorporation ceremony in 1972. You're both listed as co-founders and equal partners." My heart stopped. In all the evidence I'd gathered, all the documents I'd examined, I'd focused on the theft of Sebastian's business empire without considering my own legal stake in its foundation. The Marchand Theater Company hadn't been Sebastian's sole venture. It had been our joint creation, built with my artistic vision and his business acumen working in equal partnership. "Junie," I said slowly, "show me what you found." She pulled out her laptop and navigated to a digitized newspaper archive. The Portland Arts Weekly from March 15, 1972, featured a story about the theater company's launch. There we were, Sebastian and I at 31 and 29, respectively, beaming at the camera while signing incorporation papers. The caption read, "Sebastian and Estelle Marchand establish regional theater company with ambitious 5-year expansion plan." The article described me as the artistic force behind the company's vision, while Sebastian was the business mind bringing that vision to financial reality. We'd been true partners in every sense, contributing equally to what would become a multi-million-dollar entertainment empire. I'd forgotten, I whispered, though that wasn't entirely true. I'd deliberately put those memories aside after Sebastian's death, focusing on grief rather than legacy. It had been easier to think of myself as the supportive wife of a successful businessman than to remember being an entrepreneur and creative force in my own right. "There's more," Junie said gently. She pulled up another document, the original, Articles of Incorporation for Marchand Theatre Company. Both Sebastian's and my signatures appeared as co-founding partners, each holding equal ownership stakes. "This changes everything," I said, my mind racing through legal implications. If I was a co-founder and equal partner, then my children hadn't just stolen Sebastian's business legacy. They'd stolen mine as well. The fraud was even more extensive than I'd realized. "Grandma E, are you okay? You look pale." I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window where morning fog was burning off the ocean. "Junie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. When you look at me, what do you see?" She seemed puzzled by the question. "I see a brilliant woman who's been underestimated by her own family. I see someone with stories to tell and experiences that matter. Why? Do I seem confused? To you? Mentally declining? Incompetent? Are you kidding?" Junie laughed. "You're sharper than most people half your age. You remember details from 50 years ago. You can quote Shakespeare from memory. And you're more articulate than half the interview subjects I work with. Who told you that you were declining?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Alton's voice was urgent. "Estelle, we need to talk immediately. I've been reviewing the incorporation documents Junie sent me, and there's something crucial we missed." "I know," I said. "I was a co-founder, equal partner." "It's bigger than that. According to the Oregon law, the surviving partner in a business marriage automatically inherits full control unless specifically modified by later documents. If Sebastian never legally altered the original partnership structure, then they stole everything from me, not just from Sebastian's estate." "Exactly, and there's more. I think we need to examine Sebastian's personal effects more carefully. In my experience, men like your husband often kept insurance policies, evidence that could protect both partners if something went wrong." After ending the call, I looked at Junie with new understanding. Her research hadn't been casual interest in family history. It had been investigative instinct, the same drive that made her question inconsistencies and dig deeper than surface explanations. "Junie," I said carefully, "hypothetically speaking, if someone discovered their family had been systematically stealing from them, what would you advise them to do?" Her eyes sharpened with professional interest. "I'd tell them to document everything, find allies they could trust, and make sure they had legal representation before confronting the perpetrators." She paused. "This isn't hypothetical, is it? I made a decision that would change both our lives." "No, it's not. And I think it's time you knew the truth about what your father and Aunt Mireille have been doing." For the next hour, I told Junie everything. The forged documents, the manipulated medical evaluations, the systematic theft of assets, the legal battle I'd begun with Alton's help. She listened with growing horror and excitement, her journalist's instincts engaged by the story's complexity, while her family loyalty was challenged by its implications. "This is huge," she said finally. "This isn't just family drama, this is criminal conspiracy. And if you were a co-founder—" She trailed off, working through the legal ramifications. It means your father doesn't just owe me restitution. He owes me control of the entire company he's been running in my name." Junie was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. When she spoke again, her voice was steady with professional determination. "I want to help, not just as your granddaughter, but as a journalist. This story needs to be told. It could destroy your relationship with your father. He destroyed that himself when he decided to steal from his own mother." Junie's jaw was set with stubborn resolve I recognized from my own mirror. "Besides, this is bigger than family politics. This is about elder abuse, corporate fraud, and the systematic silencing of older women. People need to know this happens." We spent the afternoon going through Sebastian's personal effects with new purpose. Junie photographed everything, while I narrated the significance of various items: awards from the theater community, correspondence with business partners, personal mementos that told the story of our joint success. In Sebastian's jewelry box, tucked behind his collection of cufflinks, Junie found something that made us both freeze: a small brass key, tarnished with age, attached to a numbered tag I didn't recognize. "Safety deposit box," Junie said immediately. "But not from your usual bank. The number format is different." I turned the key over in my palm, my mind racing. Sebastian had never mentioned a separate safety deposit box. But then again, he'd been a careful man who believed in contingencies. If he'd suspected our children might someday challenge our business arrangement, he might have preserved evidence to protect both our interests. "How do we find out which bank?" I asked. Junie was already on her laptop. "Give me an hour." Her research skills were remarkable. She cross-referenced bank routing numbers, called institutions claiming to be settling estate matters, and used public records to trace Sebastian's financial relationships. By dinner time, she'd identified the bank and confirmed the box's existence. "First National, downtown Portland," she announced triumphantly. The box was opened in 1995, and the rental fees have been automatically deducted from a separate account ever since. You're listed as the secondary authorized user. The year Sebastian Jr. had graduated from business school and begun pushing for more control over company decisions. The year Mireille had finished her medical residency and started questioning our antiquated approaches to wealth management. The year Sebastian had apparently decided to prepare for exactly what eventually happened. "We're going tomorrow," I decided. "First thing in the morning." That evening, Theo called. His voice was shaky with emotion. "Mom, I've been thinking about yesterday, about the documents Sebastian showed me. I think I need to talk to you privately." "Of course, dear. Come whenever you'd like." "Now? I know it's late, but I can't sleep. I can't stop thinking about Dad's signature on those papers." Theo arrived 20 minutes later, looking haggard and years older than his 47 years. Junie made coffee while I led him to the living room, noting how his hands shook slightly as he accepted the mug. "Mom," he began, then stopped, struggling with words. "I need to tell you something, and you're gonna hate me for it." I could never hate you, Theo. 3 years ago, Sebastian asked me to sign some papers. He said they were updating Dad's estate planning, making sure everything was properly organized for tax purposes. I didn't read them carefully. I trusted him. Theo's voice broke. One of them was a medical evaluation stating that I'd observed signs of your mental decline. My blood ran cold. "Theo, I never observed anything like that," he said quickly. "You've always been sharp, always been yourself. But Sebastian said it was just a formality, a legal protection in case anyone ever questioned family decisions about Dad's business. He said it would never be used unless absolutely necessary. Junie and I exchanged glances. Theo's signature on a medical evaluation would carry significant weight in any competency hearing, especially coming from the family member who'd always been closest to me. There's more, Theo continued. I think Sebastian and Mireille have been planning this for years. They used to have these hushed conversations during family gatherings, stopping when I came near. And lately, Sebastian's been asking pointed questions about your daily routines, your memory, your ability to handle complex decisions. Why are you telling me this now? I asked gently. Because I saw those forged signatures yesterday, and I realized what they really are. And because... He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Because I've been complicit in stealing from... My own mother and I can't live with that anymore. Theo's confession was both devastating and liberating. It confirmed the extent of Sebastian Jr. and Mireille's conspiracy, while providing us with a witness who could testify to their premeditation. More importantly, it meant I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. Will you help us? Junie asked her uncle directly. Will you testify about what really happened? Theo nodded without hesitation. Whatever it takes to make this right. That night, lying in bed while Junie worked on her laptop in the guest room, and Theo slept on the living room couch, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Sebastian's death. I felt like I had a family again. Not the children who'd betrayed me, but these two young people who saw me as I really was and were willing to fight beside me. Tomorrow we would open Sebastian's secret safety deposit box and discover what insurance policy he'd left for exactly this situation. Tonight, for the first time in years, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future. The safety deposit box at First National Bank contained 23 years' worth of Sebastian's contingency planning. As the bank employee slid the metal box across the table in the small private room, my hands trembled with anticipation. Junie sat beside me with her camera ready, while Theo paced nervously near the door. Whatever's in here, I said to both of them. We look at it together. No secrets. The key turned smoothly, and the lid lifted to reveal Sebastian's methodical preparation for betrayal. Stacks of documents were organized in manila folders with handwritten labels in his distinctive script. Original incorporation papers. Audio, evidence, financial irregularities, and most ominously, children's correspondence. Junie photographed everything before we touched a single item. Then I opened the first folder with shaking hands. The original incorporation papers confirmed what Junie had discovered. I was listed as equal co-founder and partner in Marchand Theatre Company, with full rights to business control and asset distribution. But Sebastian had gone further, including notarized letters from our early investors confirming that my artistic vision and industry connections had been crucial to securing their backing. He documented your contributions, Junie breathed, reading, over my shoulder. Every grant application you wrote, every artistic partnership you negotiated, every creative decision that built the company's reputation. The evidence painted a picture I'd almost forgotten. Myself as a dynamic businesswoman who'd used theatrical connections to expand our empire. The Seattle Opera House rental that led to our first major success. The partnership with the University of Oregon that provided steady revenue streams. The grant from the National Endowment for the Arts that I'd personally lobbied for in Washington, D.C. But it was the audio recordings that made us all fall silent. Sebastian had apparently been taping conversations with our children since the mid-1990s, using a small recording device hidden in his home office. The first tape was dated April 1995, just after Sebastian Jr.'s business school graduation. His voice, so familiar it made my heart ache, filled the small bank room. Testing, testing. April 15th, 1995. I'm concerned about some conversations I've had with Sebastian Jr. regarding the business structure. I hope I'm wrong about his intentions, but Estelle needs protection if something happens to me. The next voice was our eldest son at 26, his tone already carrying the entitled arrogance that would define his later years. Dad, you have to face facts. Mom's artistic background is a liability in today's business environment. Investors want MBA credentials, not Shakespeare quotations. Your mother's artistic background built this company. Sebastian's voice replied firmly. Her connections in the arts community continue to drive our success. But she's not equipped to handle complex financial decisions. If something happened, to you, the company would need professional management, not sentimental leadership. Even on a decades-old recording, Sebastian Jr.'s dismissive tone made my blood boil. Junie reached over and squeezed my hand, while Theo stared at the tape player with horror. The recordings spanned years, documenting my children's growing impatience with my role in the company and their increasing pressure on Sebastian to modernize our business structure. Mireille's voice appeared frequently, offering medical opinions about my supposed declining capacity, despite having no psychiatric training and minimal contact with me during those years. The most damning recording was dated December 2012, just months before Sebastian's death. Dad, we need to discuss succession planning realistically, Sebastian Jr.'s voice said. Mom's 69 years old. She hasn't been actively involved in day-to-day operations for years, and she's showing signs of confusion about our complex financial matters. What signs? Sebastian's voice was sharp with suspicion. She asked me to explain the quarterly reports 3 times last month. She seems overwhelmed by basic business concepts she used to understand easily. Those reports have gotten increasingly complex. I sometimes need clarification myself. It's more than that, Mireille's voice interjected. I've observed some concerning symptoms during family gatherings. Memory lapses, difficulty following complex conversations, occasional disorientation. The recording captured Sebastian's long pause before responding. Mireille, you're talking about your mother. Are you making clinical observations about your own family member? I'm making professional observations about concerning behavioral changes, she replied coolly. Changes that could impact the company's stability if you're not here to provide guidance. The company belongs to both your mother and me equally. Any succession planning needs to respect that partnership. Of course, Sebastian Jr. said quickly. We're just suggesting that professional management might be necessary during any transition period. Temporary oversight to protect Mom's interests. I stopped the tape, my hands shaking with rage. Temporary oversight, I repeated. They were planning this before your grandfather even died. Theo had gone pale. I remember those conversations about succession planning. They presented it as being protective of you, making sure you wouldn't be overwhelmed by business pressures after Dad's death. Were you part of these discussions? Junie asked her uncle directly. Sometimes. But I never heard them talk about Mom being incompetent or confused. They presented it as respectful, allowing her to grieve without worrying about business operations. Theo's voice carried the weight of years of manipulation. They made it sound like kindness. The final recording was devastating. Dated January 2013, just weeks before Sebastian's fatal heart attack. It captured his growing suspicions about our children's true intentions. Estelle? Sebastian's voice said clearly. If you're listening to this, it means I'm gone and you've found evidence that our children are trying to steal what we built together. I've been documenting their plans for months, and I fear my death will trigger actions I can't prevent from the grave." My recorded husband's voice continued with instructions that proved his deep love and understanding of what I would face. "You are stronger than they believe, more capable than they've convinced you to think, and absolutely entitled to everything we created together. Don't let them use grief to manipulate you. Don't let them use age to diminish you. Fight back with everything. You have." Junie was crying openly while Theo stared at the floor in shame. The bank employee had long since left us alone with our family's recorded betrayal. But Sebastian wasn't finished. "I've included evidence of irregularities I discovered in recent financial reports. Sebastian Jr. has been moving assets into subsidiary, accounts I never authorized. Mireille has been consulting with estate planning attorneys without my knowledge. They're preparing to exclude you from decisions about your own legacy." The final folder contained financial documents that revealed the scope of their early theft. Assets transferred to shell companies, consulting fees paid to firms that existed only on paper, equipment sales that never appeared in official company reports. Sebastian Jr. had been embezzling from the company for years before his father's death, preparing the financial landscape for larger theft once Sebastian's oversight disappeared. "This is prosecution-level evidence," Junie said, her journalistic instincts overriding family loyalty. "This isn't just civil fraud. This is organized criminal enterprise." I closed the safety deposit box with trembling hands, my mind processing decades of documented betrayal. Sebastian had known what was coming and had tried to protect me from beyond the grave. His love and foresight were overwhelming, but so was the realization of how completely I'd been isolated and manipulated. "What do we do now?" Theo asked quietly. Before I could answer, my phone rang. Alton's voice was urgent. "Estelle, where are you? Sebastian Jr. and Mireille have filed an emergency petition claiming you're being manipulated by outside influences. They're seeking immediate guardianship based on your recent erratic behavior and susceptibility to exploitation." "What does that mean?" "It means they're trying to have you declared legally incompetent before our fraud case can proceed. Emergency. Hearing is scheduled for Friday. That's 3 days from now. Can you get to my office immediately?" I looked at Junie and Theo, both staring at me with anxious faces. My children weren't just fighting to keep their stolen assets. They were fighting to silence me permanently. "We're coming," I said into the phone. "And Alton, we found Sebastian's insurance policy. It's even worse than we thought." The drive to Portland passed in tense silence. Junie and Theo took turns reviewing the audio recordings while I processed the magnitude of what we'd discovered. My husband had spent the last years of his life documenting our children's plan to destroy me, and now those same children were racing to complete their theft before I could use his evidence against them. Alton's office occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in Portland's Pearl District, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. He greeted us with grim efficiency, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, his expensive suit suggesting a successful practice built on high-stakes litigation. "Show me everything," he said immediately. For 2 hours we spread evidence across his conference table while Alton absorbed details with professional intensity. He took notes, asked pointed questions, and gradually built a timeline of systematic fraud that stretched back decades. "This changes our entire strategy," he said finally. "We're not just suing for asset recovery. We're proving criminal conspiracy with documentary evidence. The recordings alone would convince any jury. But combined with the financial irregularities..." What about their guardianship petition? I asked. We fight it with everything we have. Theo's testimony about the fabricated medical evaluations, Junie's documentation of your mental acuity, the audio evidence proving their premeditation. Alton's smile was predatory. They've made a tactical error by rushing to court. Emergency guardianship hearings require immediate evidence of incompetence. But you've just demonstrated remarkable investigative capability by uncovering their fraud. That evening, back at my coastal home, the three of us prepared for legal war. Uni worked on organizing evidence, while Theo practiced his testimony about being manipulated into signing false medical evaluations. I studied Sebastian's audio recordings, memorizing conversations that proved my children's calculated betrayal. Around midnight, Junie looked up from her laptop with professional excitement. Grandma E, I want to ask you something important. How would you feel about this story being public? Not just the legal case, but the deeper story about elder abuse and family betrayal? You want to write about this? I want to expose this. Elder abuse is epidemic, but victims rarely fight back publicly. Your case could inspire other people who've been silenced by their own families. I thought about Sebastian's recorded voice, urging me to fight with everything I had. He'd built his business empire on principles of fairness and community contribution. Exposing our children's crimes might honor his memory better than simply recovering our stolen assets. Write the story, I decided. Let the world know what happens when families confuse love with control, when children mistake age for incompetence. As Junie began drafting her exposé, I sat on my porch listening to ocean waves crash against the cliffs below. Tomorrow would bring the most important performance of my life, convincing a judge that this crazy grandma was competent to reclaim everything that had been stolen from her. The fog was rolling in from the Pacific, but for the first time in years, my future seemed crystal clear. The Multnomah County Courthouse buzzed with activity as we arrived for the emergency guardianship hearing. Judge Anaya Hollowbrook's courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but its high ceilings and dark wood paneling carried the weight of institutional authority. I wore my best Navy suit, the same one I'd worn to Sebastian's funeral, and carried myself with the dignity of a woman who'd commanded stages across the Pacific Northwest. Sebastian Jr. and Mireille sat at the plaintiff's table with their attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive gray suit who shuffled papers with theatrical precision. They looked confident, prepared for what they clearly expected to be a routine proceeding. Dr. Garrison sat behind them, medical files spread across his lap like ammunition. Alton had warned me that guardianship hearings were typically brief affairs. Adult children would present evidence of incompetence. Medical professionals would confirm cognitive decline, and judges would approve protective measures in the best interests of vulnerable elderly people. The system was designed to move quickly, prioritizing safety over autonomy. But our case was different. Alton had filed extensive counter-motions documenting the fraud we'd discovered, and Junie's journalistic research had attracted media attention that filled the courtroom's gallery with reporters and advocates for elder rights. Judge Hollowbrook entered with the commanding presence of someone who'd spent decades navigating complex family dynamics. At 62, she was closer to my age than my children's, her silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes suggesting someone who wouldn't be easily fooled by surface presentations. "This is an emergency petition for guardianship," she began, reviewing documents with meticulous attention. "The petitioners claim their mother, Estelle Marchand, has become incompetent to manage her affairs and is being exploited by outside influences. Mrs. Marchand has filed counterclaims, alleging fraud and elder abuse by the petitioners themselves. Sebastian, Jr.'s attorney stood with polished confidence. "Your Honor, Mrs. Marchand's recent behavior clearly demonstrates diminished capacity. She's filed frivolous lawsuits against her own children, made wild accusations of theft and conspiracy, and fallen under the influence of individuals who may be exploiting her confusion for financial gain." "What evidence supports these claims?" Judge Hollowbrook asked. "Medical evaluations documenting cognitive decline, witness statements about erratic behavior, and financial decisions that suggest impaired judgment." The attorney gestured toward Dr. Garrison. "Dr. Garrison has been monitoring Mrs. Marchand's condition for several years and can speak to the progression of her mental deterioration." Dr. Garrison took the stand with the authority of medical expertise. His testimony painted a picture of gradual cognitive decline, missed appointments that suggested memory problems, confusion about complex financial matters, increasing dependence on family members for basic decisions. "Mrs. Marchand has shown classic signs of age-related cognitive impairment," he testified. "Difficulty processing complex information, memory gaps regarding recent events, and declining judgment about financial and legal matters." But Alton's cross-examination revealed crucial inconsistencies. "Dr. Garrison, when did you last conduct a face-to-face examination of Mrs. Marchand?" "Approximately 2 years ago, for a routine physical examination." "So, your recent evaluations of her mental state are based on second-hand reports, rather than direct observation." "I relied on family members' detailed descriptions of concerning behaviors. Family members who stood to inherit Mrs. Marchand's assets if she were declared incompetent." The objection was sustained, but Alton had planted the seed of bias. He continued methodically dismantling Dr. Garrison's testimony, revealing that the medical professional had never conducted standardized cognitive assessments, had never observed the behaviors he described, and had significant financial relationships with the Marchand family through their medical insurance policies. Mireille's testimony was more polished, but equally damaging to their case. She spoke with clinical detachment about observing my declining capabilities during family gatherings, my confusion about business matters, my inappropriate attachment to Sebastian's memory. "My mother talks to my father's portrait regularly," she testified. "She quotes Shakespeare at inappropriate times, becomes confused about current events, and seems unable to distinguish between past and present." "Dr. Marchand Stone," Alton said during cross-examination, "are you board-certified in psychiatry or geriatric medicine?" "No, I'm a neurologist specializing in." "So you're not qualified to diagnose psychiatric conditions or age-related cognitive disorders?" "I have sufficient medical training to recognize concerning symptoms. Symptoms you observe during brief family visits rather than clinical examinations." Again, the pattern emerged. My children's case relied on casual observations, interpreted through the lens of financial self-interest, rather than professional medical assessment. When my turn came to testify, I approached the witness stand with the confidence I'd learned during decades of stage performances. This was my moment to reclaim my voice, my dignity, my life. "Mrs. Marchand," Alton began gently, "please tell the court about your educational background and professional experience." I spoke clearly about my college education, my successful acting career, my role as co-founder of Marchand Theatre Company. I explained how Sebastian and I had built our business empire together, how my artistic connections and grant-writing abilities had been crucial to our early success. "Your children claim you've become confused about financial matters. How do you respond to that allegation?" "I respond by presenting evidence of their systematic theft," I said, my voice carrying across the courtroom. I may have been grief-stricken after my husband's death, but I wasn't confused. I was manipulated by children I trusted, children who used my sorrow to justify stealing my life's work. The audio recordings were played in their entirety, Sebastian's voice filling the courtroom with prophetic warnings about our children's intentions. The effect was devastating. Lawyers, reporters, even the court stenographer stopped their activities to listen to a dead man's documentation of family betrayal. Sebastian Jr.'s face grew increasingly pale as his younger voice plotted my downfall, while Mireille maintained her clinical composure despite the damning evidence of her participation. The recordings revealed not confused elderly parents, but calculating adult children methodically planning to steal their inheritance before their father's death. Junie testified with journalistic precision about her research into my mental acuity, her documentation of my coherent planning and strategic thinking. She presented evidence of my active correspondence with former theater colleagues, my management of household affairs, my clear understanding of complex legal concepts. My grandmother is one of the sharpest people I know, she said directly to Judge Hollowbrook. She remembers details from 50 years ago, manages complex logistical arrangements, and thinks strategically about problems and solutions. The idea that she's incompetent is not just wrong, it's insulting. Theo's testimony was emotionally powerful. He admitted to signing false medical evaluations, described his siblings' manipulation tactics, and spoke about the guilt that had finally driven him to support my case. I was complicit in this fraud, he said, tears visible despite his effort to maintain composure. I allowed my brother and sister to convince me that we were protecting our mother when we were actually stealing from her. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But the most dramatic moment came when Alton presented the original incorporation documents for Marchand Theatre Company, proving my status as equal co-founder and partner. Your Honor, he said, Mrs. Marchand isn't just the victim of fraud by her children. She's the rightful owner of the business empire they've been operating in her name. They haven't just stolen her assets, they've stolen her identity as a successful entrepreneur and business leader. Judge Hollowbrook called a brief recess to review the evidence, leaving both sides to await her decision in tense silence. Sebastian Jr. and Mireille huddled with their attorney, their confident facade finally cracking under the weight of documented evidence. Their case for my incompetence had been systematically demolished by proof of their own criminal behavior. I've reviewed extensive evidence regarding Mrs. Estelle Marchand's mental capacity and the allegations of fraud made by both sides in this proceeding, she began. The petitioners have failed to provide credible evidence of cognitive impairment or incompetence. Their medical testimony relies on second-hand observations by biased family members rather than professional clinical assessment. Sebastian Jr.'s attorney attempted to object, but Judge Hollowbrook continued with increasing intensity. More troubling are the extensive audio recordings and documentary evidence suggesting the petitioners have engaged in systematic fraud against Mrs. Marchand over multiple years. The evidence suggests this guardianship petition is not motivated by concern for Mrs. Marchand's welfare, but by desire to prevent her from pursuing legitimate legal claims against them. The judge's eyes fixed on Sebastian Jr. and Mireille with a unmistakable disgust. Adult children who steal from their elderly parents represent one of the most despicable forms of abuse our society faces. When those children then attempt to use the legal system to silence their victims, they compound their crimes with breathtaking arrogance. She lifted her gavel with deliberate ceremony. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied. Mrs. Marchand retains full legal capacity to manage her affairs, pursue litigation, and make independent decisions about her life and assets. The gavel struck with finality that echoed through the silent courtroom. Sebastian Jr. and Mireille stared in shock at their complete defeat, while Junie gripped my hand with excitement. But Judge Hollowbrook wasn't finished. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal fraud and elder abuse charges. The evidence presented today suggests crimes that extend far beyond civil disputes. As we filed out of the courtroom, reporters surrounded us with questions about the case's broader implications for elder abuse prevention. Junie handled most interviews with professional skill, while I stood beside her, finally feeling like myself again. Not the confused widow my children had portrayed, but the strong woman Sebastian had fallen in love with 50 years ago. Outside the courthouse, Sebastian Jr. approached me with desperate eyes. "Mother, please, can't we work this out privately? As a family?" I looked at my eldest son, seeing not the successful businessman he'd become, but the scared little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Despite everything, part of me still loved him, but love without respect was merely sentimentality, and I was done being sentimental. "We stopped being a family the day you decided I was too old and confused to deserve honesty," I said quietly. "Now we're just people who share DNA and court schedules." The triumph felt bittersweet, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I was legally, officially, undeniably myself again. 6 months later, I stood on the stage of the newly renovated Marchand Theater in downtown Portland, looking out at an audience that included former colleagues, elder, rights advocates, journalists, and family members whose relationships had been forever changed by our legal battle. The theater's restoration had been my first decision as restored owner of Marchand Entertainment Group, and tonight marked both its grand reopening and the launch of the Estelle Marchand Foundation for Elder Rights. Junie sat in the front row with her notebook, documenting every detail for the book she was writing about our case. Her exposé in The Atlantic had sparked national conversations about elder abuse, and publishers were bidding aggressively for her expanded account of our legal victory. Beside her, Theo operated a professional camera, his artistic eye capturing moments that would illustrate Junie's narrative. Sebastian Jr. and Mireille were notably absent, though their legal troubles continued to generate headlines. The district attorney had filed charges for fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy, while civil suits from other theater investors who'd been defrauded during their management were mounting. Their comfortable lives had crumbled as completely as they'd hoped mine would, but I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only sadness for what our family might have been if greed hadn't overwhelmed love. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying easily through the restored space. 50 years ago, my husband Sebastian and I founded this theater company with a simple vision that regional theater could bring communities together through shared stories and authentic human experiences. The audience listened with respectful attention, many of them old enough to remember my original performing career. Silver-haired men and women filled half the seats, their presence a testament to the growing political power of aging populations who refuse to be invisible. Tonight, we're expanding that vision. The Estelle Marchand Foundation will provide legal advocacy for elderly people facing family fraud, financial support for seniors pursuing education and creative ventures, and research funding for combating ageism in all its forms. Alton, now serving as the Foundation's legal director, stood and began reading the charter we'd drafted together. The foundation would operate through multiple programs: direct legal assistance for elder abuse victims, educational initiatives about ageism and exploitation, and grant programs supporting seniors who wanted to pursue new careers or artistic ventures later in life. Too many older adults are silenced by families who confuse aging with incompetence, I continued. Too many stories go untold because society assumes creativity and ambition expire at arbitrary ages. We're here to prove that assumption wrong. The Foundation's first major initiative would fund a documentary about my case, directed by Theo and narrated by myself. Major television networks had expressed interest in the project, recognizing that elder abuse represented an underreported crisis affecting millions of families. After the formal presentation, I mingled with guests who'd supported our legal battle and were now contributing to the Foundation's mission. Margaret Chen, my former spy neighbor, approached with obvious embarrassment. "Estelle, I owe you an enormous apology," she said quietly. "I never realized that my reports to your children were being used against you. I thought I was helping concerned family members monitor your welfare." I'd struggled with anger toward Margaret for months, but time and therapy had helped me understand her perspective. "You were manipulated too," I said honestly. Sebastian Jr. and Muriel were skilled at making their surveillance seem like caring. "What they did was monstrous," Margaret said, tears in her eyes. "How could children treat their own mother that way?" It was a question I'd been asked dozens of times by reporters, lawyers, and advocates. The answer was complex, involving inheritance anxiety, cultural ageism, and the gradual dehumanization that occurred when adult children began viewing their parents as burdens rather than people. "Fear," I said simply. They were afraid of being left out of decisions about money they felt entitled to inherit. They were afraid of my continued independence, which challenged their narrative about needing to control my life. Mostly, they were afraid of admitting that their treatment of me was motivated by greed rather than love. Dr. Garrison had lost. His medical license after investigation revealed his participation in fabricating medical evaluations for financial compensation. Mireille faced professional sanctions from the State Medical Board for using her credentials to support fraudulent competency claims. Their careers had been destroyed along with their freedom, yet I felt surprisingly little vindication. Revenge, it turned out, was less satisfying than restoration. Getting my life back mattered more than watching theirs fall apart. The evening's highlight came when Madame Violette, my old friend from Paris, took the stage to perform a dramatic reading from Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking scene. At 85, she retained the commanding presence that had made her legendary in European theater circles decades ago. "Out, damned spot!" she intoned, her French accent adding exotic gravity to Shakespeare's immortal words. The audience was mesmerized by her performance, which served as both entertainment and metaphor for the guilt that would forever stain my children's consciences. After the reception, I found myself alone on the theater stage, surrounded by the ghosts of performances past and the promise of stories yet to be told. The restored space felt both familiar and renewed. Like myself, it bore scars from recent trauma, but retained the essential character that had made it special. Junie appeared beside me with her ever-present notebook. "How does it feel, Grandma? Getting your life back, I mean." I considered the question carefully. "Like waking up from a very long, very bad dream. For years I let other people define who I was. The grieving widow, the confused grandmother, the burden that needed managing. Fighting back reminded me that I'm still the woman who built all this. Any regrets about how it ended with Dad and Aunt Mireille? I regret that they chose money over family. I regret that they couldn't see me as a person worthy of honesty and respect. But I don't regret fighting back. Your grandfather always said that dignity isn't given. It's claimed. I spent too many years forgetting that lesson." Junie nodded, scribbling notes about the conversation. Her book would chronicle not just our legal victory, but the deeper story of how families could be poisoned by assumptions about aging and entitlement. Theo joined us on stage, his camera equipment packed away after documenting the evening's events. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know I can't undo what happened, but I want you to know that working on the foundation feels like the first meaningful thing I've done in years." I hugged my youngest son, feeling the genuine remorse that had driven his decision to testify against his siblings. Theo would never fully escape the guilt of his complicity, but his commitment to preventing other families from experiencing similar betrayals was helping him build a different kind of redemption. "Your father would be proud of both of you," I told Junie and Theo. He always believed that mistakes could be transformed into wisdom if we were brave enough to learn from them. As we prepared to leave the theater, I took one last look at the stage where Sebastian and I had performed together 50 years ago. The space held memories of triumph and creativity, but it also represented something larger, the proof that age didn't diminish capability, that experience enhanced rather than limited possibility, that the most powerful stories often belonged to people society had written off as irrelevant. Walking to my car through Portland's evening mist, I felt the profound satisfaction of having reclaimed not just my stolen assets, but my identity as a woman capable of fighting for herself and others. The foundation would ensure that my victory contributed to a larger movement, challenging ageism and elder abuse. At 79, I was finally, completely myself again. Not crazy Grandma Estelle, but Estelle Marchand, actress, entrepreneur, and architect of her own justice. The performance of my lifetime had ended with standing ovations from the people who mattered most, those who recognized that aging brought wisdom rather than weakness, experience rather than incompetence. Sebastian's portrait still watched over my cliffside living room, but now his painted eyes seemed to reflect approval rather than pity. We'd built something beautiful together, seen it nearly destroyed by the children we'd raised, and ultimately restored it to serve purposes larger than either of us had originally imagined. The ocean still crashed against the cliffs below my home, its rhythm as eternal and unstoppable as the determination I'd rediscovered within myself. Some battles were worth fighting regardless of age, and some victories belonged as much to the future as to the past. I was no longer just surviving my golden years. I was commanding them. Word count, 2,000. 3 years have passed since Judge Hollowbrook's gavel restored my legal rights and dignity, and I'm writing these final thoughts from my home office, the same room where I once discovered the forged documents that started this entire journey. The morning Pacific fog is lifting, revealing a coastline that looks exactly the same as it did during my darkest hours, though everything else has changed completely. The Estelle Marchand Foundation has grown beyond my wildest expectations. We've provided legal assistance to over 300 elder abuse victims across 17 states, with a success rate that has attracted attention from federal legislators crafting new protective laws. Junie's book, Crazy Grandma: How One Woman's Fight Exposed America's Elder Abuse Crisis, spent 14 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and spawned a documentary that won an Emmy for outstanding social issue programming. More personally, satisfying are the letters I receive weekly from seniors who found the courage to fight back against family manipulation. Yesterday's mail brought a note from an 84-year-old woman in Texas whose adult children had been stealing her Social Security payments for 5 years. After reading Junie's book, she'd contacted our foundation, secured legal representation, and successfully prosecuted her own case. "You showed me that age doesn't equal helplessness," she wrote. "Thank you for proving that we don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from family." Theo has transformed from reluctant participant in his siblings' crimes to passionate advocate for elder rights. His documentary work with the foundation has earned national recognition, including a Sundance Film Festival award for his piece about financial abuse in assisted living facilities. More importantly, he's found redemption through service, channeling his guilt into genuine efforts to prevent other families from experiencing our tragedy. "I can't undo what I did," he told me recently while reviewing footage for our latest project. "But I can spend the rest of my career making sure other people recognize the warning signs I missed." Junie's journalism career has flourished beyond investigative reporting into elder advocacy. She's become a sought-after speaker on ageism and family dynamics, her youth lending credibility to arguments that intergenerational respect benefits everyone. Last month, she testified before Congress about proposed legislation strengthening penalties for elder financial abuse. "Grandma E changed my understanding of what aging means," she said during her congressional testimony. "She proved that experience enhances capability rather than limiting it. That wisdom comes from survival rather than surrender." Sebastian Jr. and Mireille served 18 months in minimum security prison for fraud and elder abuse charges, their sentences reduced through plea bargains that required full restitution and community service focused on elder care. Their professional reputations never recovered. Sebastian Jr.'s real estate license was permanently revoked, while Mireille's medical practice collapsed under the weight of malpractice suits and ethical violations. I've seen them twice since. Their release, both encounters accidental meetings in downtown Portland that carried the awkward weight of unfinished family business. They look older, diminished by consequences they never imagined when plotting my downfall. Sebastian Jr.'s hair has gone completely gray, while Mireille has developed a nervous habit of avoiding direct eye contact. Neither has apologized directly, though their lawyers conveyed expressions of regret during restitution negotiations. I've come to understand that genuine remorse requires acknowledging the humanity of one's victims, something they may never be capable of doing. They saw me as an obstacle to their inheritance rather than their mother, and that fundamental dehumanization can't be easily reversed. The business empire we fought over has been completely restructured around social impact rather than pure profit. Marchand Entertainment Group now operates 12 theaters across the Pacific Northwest, each featuring programming specifically designed to challenge ageist stereotypes. Our Wisdom Project showcases performances by actors over 60, while Legacy Voices preserves oral histories from elderly community members. The financial returns have exceeded expectations, proving that purpose-driven business models can be more profitable than purely extractive ones. Investors who initially worried about my emotional management style now praise the company's community engagement and steady growth. My personal life has found rhythms I never expected at this stage. Madame Violette moved from Paris to Portland 18 months ago, purchasing a condo near my coastal home. We spend evenings discussing philosophy, reviewing scripts for foundation projects, and planning trips to theater festivals around the world. At 88, she remains intellectually vibrant and artistically ambitious, embodying the possibilities I want other seniors to envision for themselves. "Darling," she said last week, while we watch sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. We've become exactly what they feared, powerful old women who refuse to disappear gracefully. Alton has become more than legal counsel. He's become family in ways that transcend professional relationships. His Harvard law degree hangs in our foundation offices, but his deeper value lies in understanding that justice often requires theatrical flair. Our legal strategies consistently surprise opposing counsel who expect elderly plaintiffs to settle quietly rather than fight publicly. "You've changed how I practice law," he told me during our latest strategy session. "I used to focus on winning cases. Now I focus on changing systems that enable abuse." The portrait of Sebastian still hangs in my living room, though our conversations have evolved from desperate pleas for guidance to updates on victories he would have celebrated. His painted eyes seem less mocking now, more proud of the woman who fought to preserve his legacy while creating her own. "We did it, my dear," I told him yesterday while dusting the frame that once hid evidence of betrayal. "We saved what we built together and transformed it into something larger than either of us imagined." The most unexpected development has been my return to performing. Last year, I accepted the lead role in our foundation's production of The Gin Game, playing an elderly woman whose wit and determination help her survive institutional neglect. The role felt both familiar and revelatory. I was finally playing a character whose age enhanced rather than limited her dramatic power. The production toured nationally, playing to audiences that included many seniors who'd never seen elderly, characters portrayed with complexity and respect. After performances, elderly audience members would approach me with tears in their eyes, thanking me for showing them representations of aging that emphasized possibility rather than decline. "I thought my story was over," one 75-year-old woman told me after a performance in Chicago. "You've shown me it might just be beginning." That sentiment captures what I've learned through this entire journey, that arbitrary assumptions about aging limit human potential more than physical or cognitive changes ever could. The same society that dismisses elderly voices as irrelevant celebrates youthful innovation, ignoring the reality that experience often produces better solutions than enthusiasm alone. My legal victory was never really about money or property, though recovering stolen assets certainly mattered. It was about reclaiming the right to be seen as a complete person, rather than a collection of stereotypes about aging. It was about proving that crazy Grandma Estelle was actually formidable Estelle Marchand, whose supposed confusion masked strategic thinking, and whose apparent frailty concealed remarkable strength. The Foundation's newest initiative focuses on combating ageism in employment, challenging businesses that systematically exclude older workers despite their experience and reliability. We're particularly proud of our mentorship programs that pair senior professionals with younger entrepreneurs, creating intergenerational partnerships that benefit both participants. "Age segregation hurts everyone," I explained during a recent TED Talk that's been viewed over 2 million times. Young people lose access to wisdom and perspective, while older people lose opportunities to contribute their experience. Integration creates stronger communities. As I finish writing this account, I'm struck by how different my life looks from what my children expected when they began their systematic theft. They assumed I would fade quietly into managed decline, grateful for their protection and unaware of their manipulation. Instead, I've become more publicly visible and politically active than ever before, using my platform to challenge assumptions about aging that enable abuse. The ocean continues its eternal rhythm against the cliffs below. My home indifferent to human dramas of betrayal and redemption. But the house itself feels different now. Not a refuge from the world, but a command center for changing it. My breakfast nook has hosted strategy sessions with congressional staffers. My living room has welcomed documentary crews from 3 networks. My kitchen has fed activists planning protests against assisted living facilities that abuse their residents. At 82, I'm busier than I was at 50, more purposeful than I was at 30, and more myself than I've ever been. The story my children tried to end has become the beginning of something larger, a movement challenging society's disposal of elderly voices and demanding recognition that wisdom and experience deserve respect rather than management. This is what victory looks like when you refuse to accept other people's definitions of your limitations. This is what happens when you remember that dignity isn't given. It's claimed, defended, and shared with others who need permission to fight for themselves. The curtain hasn't fallen on my story. It's simply risen on Act 2. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.